Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that?
Because
that is something that no president
I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I give him the space to negotiate.
Please like, subscribe, and share. Scott Jennings returned to Abby Phillip's show, once again coming across as smug, throwing out insults and pushing questionable claims. We're going to break down some of the most intense moments from that panel discussion, and I'll share my perspective along the way. Let's dive in.
A question about American values. After President Trump warned that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, he has since delayed that threat now for 2 weeks, but it still sent shockwaves all over the world, including the Vatican.
Today, as we all know, there was also this threat against all the people of Iran. This is truly unacceptable. There are certainly issues of international law here, but much more. It's a moral issue, for the good of the people entirely.
The Pope has been weighing in on this conflict for a while now, but I think you described it as a genocidal threat. Other people have described it that way. I mean, there's this debate always, should you take Trump literally or seriously? But whether you take him literally or seriously, saying that you're going to end a civilization is a serious threat that no American president has ever issued before.
And you shouldn't. And honestly, those sorts of things just really are very unhelpful. But I will also say we're not unaccustomed to him doing this. He did it with respect to North Korea. He said similar things with respect to China. He's made bluffs with respect to Canada. He's done it over and over again. And every time that he does this, I find that the media is running around chasing its tail with respect to him. I get he's the president of the United States. He should not be saying any of that sort of thing. And it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. At the same time, how many times are we going to do this with this guy? I mean, why? I mean, why are we engaging?
You can blame the media, but it's also
so the onus is on us to say, oh, well, we'll just ignore him because he's making statements like a mad king. So we just normalize it as, well, that's just Trump being Trump and move on. Is this someone that you would tell your kids that you should look up to this guy and believe what he says, with the president of the United States, or just, well, you can go around and say whatever you want and threaten to, annihilate civilizations and just, it's the media chasing its tail every time he says something like that.
In fact, I've said exactly the opposite to my kids. I have said exactly the opposite.
I'm glad.
Yes,
so why is the standard different for the president of the United States? You wouldn't let your kids get away with talking like that.
Happened over and over and over again. Yes, and he wasn't. He is the president of the United States.
So isn't it the media's job to hold him accountable for it?
You have to actually deal with what you have.
Right.
And what we're dealing right now is with a president that, again, I take the view, and I know it's a minority view, what he has done with respect to Iran has been good for society. It's been good for the world. Hamas has been degraded. Hezbollah has been degraded. The Iranian military, the nuclear, it is an evil nation state. I look at the long game rather than a bunch of talking heads.
We're not, like I said, we're doing the service to Mad Kings. Mad Kings haven't said things like that since going back to Genghis Khan. True. This is not even unprecedented in modern times. It was unprecedented even in medieval times to say things like this. And what a president says matters. It's not enough to say, well, that's just Trump, and let's not chase our tails around this. We have politicians at this table. When politicians speak, what they say, the way they say it matters and ought to matter. When I was a child and came home and if I used a profanity, my parents didn't say, that's just Bobby being Bobby and we should go on with that. I got my punishment for that. And the president should not get a free pass. He's an 80-year-old man. He's a grown adult. He cannot be just simply brushed. This kind of behavior, this kind of language cannot simply be brushed away. A civilization, for crying out loud. We're not even allowed to say that about a town or a village. We're not supposed to use language like that. George Bush went to Iraq and he used very different language. The language, I covered that war. And it was not a war I was in support of, but I covered it as a journalist in Baghdad for 5 years. I distinctly remember George Bush saying, we come to Iraq with respect for your civilization, with respect for the faiths that are practiced here. There's a difference. Presidential language goes down in history.
Agreed.
And that's got to count for something, and we cannot simply brush this away like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have any respect for the government, for this regime, but I'll tell you, unhinged and unhelpful. That's the only way when you read something like that, and you say, how does this advance the ball forward? Mm-hmm. And also, there's only so many times you can cry wolf and say things like that are so extreme and crazy where people just blow you off, including other world leaders, and don't take you seriously. And I think the more this, yes, we're desensitized, you're right, and that's not a good thing. And by the way, a little language, I'm from Jersey, so a little's okay. Let's not get too clean.
Depending on how old you are.
I mean,
Please like, subscribe, and share. Before getting into Scott Jennings' usual MAGA-style mental gymnastics, I've got to call out what Chris Mattel said, because honestly, it's a terrible argument. Think about it. What company in America would tolerate behavior like Donald Trump's? If an employee acted that way, posting what he posts or saying what he says publicly, they'd be fired immediately. Even a CEO wouldn't survive that kind of conduct. The panel compared it to a child, and it fits. No parent would let their kid act out constantly and just shrug it off with, "That's just how they are." So why is it acceptable here? The reality is Republicans either fear Trump, things daily that would end anyone else's career. They had multiple chances to draw the line. Before 2016, could have united and said enough is enough. Even after. But instead, they enabled any other politician. Eventually, when he's no longer in power, comment. Many of these same people will try to distance themselves and pretend they never backed him in the first place.
I'd read this because this is conservative commentator Orrin Cass. He's close to Vice President J.D. Vance. He says, simply put, what is the point of all of this? If these are empty threats that we all know he will not carry out, then they are ineffective threats. The Iranians are on X too, and merely making the president and our nation look foolish. If they're not empty threats, and the president is asserting the American position that such actions are acceptable in this situation and ones that we are willing to take. We are not living in some quantum thought experiment where he is simultaneously is and is not serious.
I don't agree that he's made empty threats as it relates to Iran.
This is literally an empty threat.
I don't think the people that we decapitated at the top of their regime would call them empty threats either. I mean, we've clearly demonstrated the interest in using the U.S. military to take drastic action.
All of the shifting deadlines.
Right.
What do you call the threat this morning to end their civilization, only to accept a 10-point plan that was put on the table yesterday as the basis for negotiations?
You haven't seen the 10-point plan, A. All we know is that they said they would reopen the strait. Beyond that, we don't know anything.
Hold on a second. The president retweeted the Iranian foreign minister's statement, which said explicitly that they are using the 10-point plan as a basis of negotiation. I'm not making that up. The president reiterated that on an ex post, Scott.
But I have a question.
So my point is the threats from Trump
and some of the stuff that's
to bomb their bridges, to bomb their desalination plants, to bomb them out of their civilization off the face of the earth. How are those not empty threats?
Well, it looks like it brought them to the table tonight and got them in a place where they would agree to a ceasefire. I mean, I'll give you a counter argument to all these other positions, which is
that is not connected to reality.
We have a ceasefire.
The same table,
Tel Aviv is still under attack.
The same table that we have tonight is the table that existed yesterday, in large part. And fundamentally, the only thing that has been agreed to is that Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz and will allow ships to go through on their control. That is the only thing that has been agreed to.
The strait is going to be reopened, and we're going to negotiate about the rest. Beyond that, we don't really know much of anything. But I will tell you, yesterday, Iran was saying, we're cutting off, talks. We're not going to continue the talks. The president uses some extreme language, and all of a sudden, voila, tonight, we have a ceasefire for 2 weeks. Why can't we just say, you know what? Maybe we have achieved military objectives. Maybe we have taken down their military and their ability to export terror. Maybe we have decimated their missiles. Maybe we've buried the nuclear material. And maybe we've got 2 weeks to make the world a safer place. Why can't we look at this as a glass half full moment as opposed to,
but then why
we have to make it negative for Donald Trump.
Why can't you just acknowledge that what Donald Trump said this morning was abhorrent and that no president should ever threaten annihilating a civilization? Why can't you just acknowledge that?
Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that? That is something that no president of the United States should say. Because I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I gave him the space to negotiate with the Iranians the best way he knows how.
All right, well, let me just ask one final, question, Scott, for the record. Do you think it's acceptable for the president to threaten to annihilate a civilization?
I think it's acceptable for the commander-in-chief to deal with these people in the best way that he can.
Is that a yes or is it a no?
Result.
Is that a yes or is it a no?
So that's a yes.
Is that a yes or a no?
I'm not going to second guess him.
So it's a yes.
He put out a statement. We now have a ceasefire. Okay. Those are the two things
I just wanted to ask for the record.
Yes.
That's a yes on your part. Yeah. We'll leave it there.
Please like, subscribe, and honestly, I wouldn't last long on Abby Phillip's show. If I were Tara Setmayer, I'd probably snap and tell Scott Jennings off. The level of restraint people show on that panel is impressive because even if some of it is performance, Jennings still comes across as incredibly smug. At times, it feels like no matter what happens, he refuses to criticize Donald Trump. Abby Phillip even pinned him down in that moment, basically, forcing a clear answer. That's why I keep making these videos. There's value in breaking this stuff down from a more critical perspective. The frustrating part is that a lot of these right-wing arguments don't add anything meaningful. It's mostly talking points and spin. You'd think once in a while there'd be a solid point you could acknowledge. Least criticize Trump on certain issues. That shows like Tucker Carlson, who I strongly disagree with, Scott Jennings, it just feels like constant defense no matter what. I don't know how someone goes on TV night after night sticking to that line, but I guess it works for him. Let me know what you think in the comments. Whose side are you on in this debate? And don't forget to like and subscribe.